Starfield has got to be one of the games to ever exist. Now, what do I mean by that exactly? Well, Starfield has been out for about a month now, and everyone has already pretty much given their opinions on it already. And the reviews have been pretty divisive on whether or not this is a good game. On one side, there are many people who absolutely love this game and are having a blast with it. And the other thinks that this is a generic snooze fest of a game that Bethesda have completely missed the mark on. With both of those two sides in mind, I finally decided to try out Starfield for myself and form my own opinion on this game. And after playing for about 40 hours, finishing the main story and most of the side missions, that raises the question, is Starfield a good game? And to that, I would say yes, it is a good game. If it was released 13 years ago. Look, I'm not saying Starfield is a terrible game. In fact, I think it does pretty well in some areas. But I ain't exactly saying it's a good game either. I wish I could say that I had an amazing experience with the game, but I really didn't at any point because there's nothing that this game does exceptionally well. If there were any fitting terms to describe everything that I've experienced in this game, it would be unremarkable, safe, bland. There was nothing in this game during my 40 hours of playtime that made me excited or even somewhat intrigued about the world or the gameplay. Starfield has got to be one of the most disappointing Bethesda titles that they have ever released, and this is coming right off of Fallout 76, which on launch was an unfinished, buggy mess that tanked the reputation of Bethesda for a while. And now since they finished Starfield and are pretty much officially working on Elder Scrolls 6, I'm kinda concerned about how it'll turn out if the exact same team is making that game. Now don't get me wrong, if you enjoy this game and are loving everything about it, more power to you. You can like whatever game you want, at the end of the day, it's your preference. But I unfortunately could not enjoy this game to the same degree, or even at all for that matter. Which leads me to the first reason why I didn't enjoy this game, and it's because of the exploration, or lack of it. The planets in Starfield are incredibly limited in scope and for the most part are completely barren with nothing of interest to fill them. I'm sure most of you know by now that the way Starfield does planet exploration is by making these procedurally generated instances based on where you landed on the planet. Then it puts 5 to 6 random points of interest in it as filler content. Now there are several problems with how Bethesda implemented this system. First of which is that this game gets extremely repetitive as you play the game more and more because the points of interest used in the procedural generation are reused over and over again. You'll see the same dungeons, the same civilian outposts, the same crystal formations on every single planet that you visit. The dungeons even have the same loot boxes in the exact same locations every single time. Now, you won't notice it for the first few hours of the game when everything is new, but after tens of hours of doing the exact same dungeons with the exact same enemies over and over and over again, it gets really tiring. And because of this, I've just stopped exploring about 10 hours into the game because I've pretty much seen every generated point of interest that this game had to offer. Not to mention that these points of interest are massively spaced out from one another with no way to travel in between them other than walking. Yes, it is 2023 and Bethesda Game Studios still have not figured out how to do land vehicles, even though Oblivion and Skyrim had horses, which aren't vehicles, but they still serve the same function. So because this game does have land vehicles, you're forced to walk several minutes to the next point of interest with absolutely nothing along the way. Seriously though, why aren't there any land vehicles? The game takes place 300 years in the future where we have spaceships, and you expect me to believe that all cars went extinct? Now call me a conspiracy theorist all you want, but I think that Bethesda intentionally decided not to put in vehicles because they realized that if they were in the game, players would reach the edge of the instance maps immediately.
Todd, I want to go to another one of the audience questions, and it's very specific, but so many people asked it. Why are there no vehicles?
Once you do vehicles, it does change the gameplay. So by focusing once you land in your ship, that you're on foot, it lets us really, for the players, make it an experience where we know how fast they're seeing things. In one sense, you do have a vehicle, which is you obviously have your spaceship, you can go around in space, but then on the surface, you do have a jetpack, which you can upgrade, which is super fun, new experience for us, and obviously planets have different levels of gravity, which make that unique for many planets.
You see, whenever you decide to land on any planet of your choice, the game creates a small instance area around the spot where you chose to land with set boundaries, and if you try to go outside those boundaries, the game will tell you to go back. meaning that you can't actually explore the entire planet you're on. Now, funnily enough, I really don't mind this limitation. Yeah, I don't actually care about not being able to explore every inch and crevice of some random no-name planet because there would just be nothing to explore. Imagine being able to walk infinitely in one direction on an empty, barren world with nothing to do. You might as well walk across the Sahara Desert at that point. So that's why I'm not really too keen on Bethesda giving us full exploration of the planets. Same with the ship exploration. I don't really care that I'm not allowed to manually fly 6 billion light years over to another planet because there's nothing out in space anyway. And it's not like I think the procedural generation was a bad idea. In fact, I think it could have been used pretty well if Bethesda actually put in any effort into it. Like, instead of planets spawning the exact same dungeons with the exact same layouts and the exact same enemies, they could have made each of the individual rooms randomly selected from a pool of modular rooms and generate the dungeons that way. This would make it so that no two dungeons would ever feel the same and thus give the game some replay value. Hell, even Redfall of all games did this, and it was one of the best things about that sorry ass game. There's really no excuse for this level of repetitiveness, and it's just plain lazy game design of Bethesda Game Studios that unfortunately makes this whole game feel dull and lifeless. They couldn't even bother giving us an actual map of the cities. It's literally just a blue screen with a couple of markers on it. If the developers couldn't even bother to give us a proper map to navigate these places, then why should I even bother learning about them? The developers didn't seem to care, so why should I? Even Gollum, the absolute worst game of the year, attempts to give you some sort of map, even though it looks like it was drawn by a 4-year-old. Speaking of laziness, that leads me to my second point on why I didn't like Starfield, and that's because the immersive experience is horrible. You see, in Starfield, you don't actually ever have full exploration, despite this game being advertised as an exploration game. And that's because none of the areas in Starfield are seamlessly connected with one another. Every planet, every building, and even individual rooms are separated by loading screens. You want to land on a planet? Load screen. You want to get inside your ship? Load screen. You want to enter a building? Load screen. 16 times the detail? More like 16 times the loading screens. The sheer amount of them in this game is absolutely ridiculous and completely ruins any semblance of immersion that you might have left. Like, the cities don't even feel like cities because each section is separated into like 15 different loading screens. For example, the city of Neon is this cyberpunk-esque looking city built on top of a giant oil rig, which in concept is pretty interesting, but is completely ruined by how it's executed. You see, instead of making entire cities where you can explore every section of them unimpeded, Bethesda Game Studios decided to separate them into several different loading screens, making it really obnoxious to travel throughout the cities. Like for this one quest where I had to talk to this one person on the other side of Neon, I had to go through 5 different loading screens just to talk to them. And for this one quest for the Crimson Fleet quest line, I had to go through effectively 8 different load screens to talk to this one NPC. I actually spent more time waiting for the game to load than I did traveling to this one NPC. This is completely unacceptable for a AAA game in 2023. And why do the small shops need their own loading screens? Did this tiny store here really need to have one? Like, this is absolutely ridiculous, the amount of loading screens there are in this game, and it just completely breaks all semblance of immersion, while also ironically making Starfield's universe feel small and segmented. And according to Steam and the Wikipedia, this game was praised for its open world, and to that I say open world my ass. There's nothing about this game that's open world. It's more like multiple closed sandboxes if the sandboxes had the same 3 toys in all of them no matter which one you went to, making exploration a complete joke. And I haven't even mentioned all the other immersion breaking examples that the developers just simply didn't care to change. Like this one quest I did for the Free Star Collective where I had to find this one evil dude and arrest him. I then go to a secret hideout, find him, shoot him up and incapacitate him. Then when I go to talk to him, he just gets back up like it didn't just unload 500 rounds into his head. Then after that dialogue, he just regains all of his health somehow even though he's literally dying just a few seconds ago. There was also this one mission where I had to infiltrate Ryujin Industries stealthily, but I got detected because the AI companion's stupid, so I had to shoot my way through the place. And after I complete my objective and leave the building, I come back to it and the place is as if nothing ever happened. Or the fact that NPCs don't even react to you firing your gun or using your powers in a public crowd, they just stand there unfazed.
I need to ask you to stop. That shouting is making people nervous. Can't say I've heard of any laws against whatever that is you're doing, but I'll lock you up if I have to.
It never feels like you have any player agency in this game because your decisions don't ever affect the world around you, and it will always stay the same no matter what you do. This is one of the biggest reasons why I just couldn't get invested to this game. Which brings me to the third reason why Starfield isn't that good, and that's because the story and world building is bland and unimaginative. Starfield's universe is extremely generic and forgettable with absolutely no creativity or imagination in it whatsoever. Here's what I mean. The universe of Starfield is set 300 years in the future in the year 2330, where humans have developed the technology to travel through the vast expanse of space and colonize the infinite number of planets and solar systems as far as the eye can see. You can explore any planet and any solar system to your heart's content and discover a near limitless amount of interesting things. This is such an easy concept to do right because you can literally put anything in this universe and it would still be believable. But since Bethesda game studios are creatively bankrupt, they've managed to mess this up as well. In this vast expanse of the universe where you can discover an infinite number of intelligent life forms with their own language, culture, and traditions, what do you encounter when you discover an entirely new settlement? Humans. In fact, you only encounter humans in this game. So you're telling me that after 300 years in the future where the human race has explored and colonized hundreds of planets across several solar systems, they haven't discovered one intelligent alien species that we can communicate with? Like, come on, this is really just lacking in creativity here. And I actually wouldn't mind the part where you only interact with humans if they were interesting, but they're not. They're the same generic human that speaks the same language, has the same culture, and has the same values. Funny enough, in this universe where Bethesda tried to make Starfield as diverse as possible and make everyone the same, they've removed the many different languages, cultures, and traditions that we do have in real life. Every planet in this game feels like America but in space, except without the melting pot, it's just a pot. This just feels like a weak attempt at surface level diversity, and ironically enough feels less diverse because they've homogenized every single person in this universe to think and feel the same way. And if they do think differently, they're portrayed as the bad guys. There's never any nuance or morally gray areas in this game, it's just always the good side versus the bad side. And not only that, but every person in this game is a bland, one-note character that never says or does anything interesting. For example, the companions at the Constellation are all good guys that just want to do the right thing, and none of them ever do anything that can be considered morally ambiguous. The Freestar Collective are the exact same thing, but with a Western theme. Ryujin is supposed to be the morally gray faction, but all the quests and characters are so incredibly boring that I forgot about them right after I finished their faction quest. And the Crimson Fleet are supposed to be the evil faction, but they don't really feel evil because you never really see them commit any heinous acts. They're just kinda mean to you. The problem with Starfield is that it's too afraid to push the envelope with its world building because it's too afraid of alienating or offending people. And because of that, this game feels neutered, sterile, safe. I remember in the Fallout games, you were able to blast an enemy's limbs off as they die in a brutal and bloody spectacle. And when you headshot them, their heads would pop like a blood balloon. In Skyrim, you can do these really cool executions on your enemies that can decapitate them. Now compare that to Starfield where there's nothing ever even close to that level of edge. Enemies are always perfectly intact when you kill them, headshots don't explode their heads, hell, there's barely any blood when you kill them. What happened to the awesome executions that we're able to do in past Bethesda games? Being able to completely disfigure and mutilate your enemies was a part of what gave those games their personality. But for some reason the higher up style was too edgy for a casual audience and they removed any sort of mutilation whatsoever in Starfield. Now we just have this incredibly sterile game that's too afraid to even show a messed up dead body. This game is so PG-13 that it could easily lose the M rating and be rated T. I think the only thing that they would have to remove are the drugs, which weren't even that important to the story anyway. It's like the writers at Bethesda were too afraid that they would alienate some of their audience with any gore or dark topics that they just removed all of it from the entire game. This might be just my opinion, but I feel like this is such a regression in Bethesda's world building and it really made Starfield a lot worse for it. The next reason why I didn't like this game was because the combat and RPG mechanics were either really clunky or poorly implemented. As you probably know by now, Starfield is pretty much a first-person shooter with some light RPG mechanics, much like how the Fallout games were, except without the VAT system. And honestly, the combat in this game is serviceable at best and tedious at worst. Shooting the guns themselves feels okay, albeit a bit clunky. The accuracy of the guns seems really off and I missed a lot of shots where I feel like I shouldn't have missed. And the reload speed feels really slow even when I put points into the reload speed perk. But other than that, the guns felt fine. However, what didn't feel fine was the melee combat because it is just straight up garbage. First of all, the melee weapons do hilariously awful damage. It would take at least 5 seconds to kill a single enemy, meanwhile a gray gun could kill multiple enemies in the same amount of time. Not only that, but swinging the melee weapons feels horrible as well because for some reason your character always swings their weapon like it's a sledgehammer no matter what. It doesn't matter if you use a knife or an axe or a wakizashi, your swing speed will always be the same slow swing like you're holding a 300-pound brick. You also swing your weapon in this weird 3-hit combo pattern that just feels awful to perform. Like, did anyone over at Bethesda actually think that this felt good to use? The whole melee combat is a meme and it just feels like a tacked on afterthought like the devs put in just because Fallout had melee weapons. And speaking of memes, the stealth straight up just sucks. Like, enemies will detect you while you're hiding behind walls or in a vent. And sneaking around them is pretty much impossible because they have eyes on the back of their heads. Stealth just really felt terrible to do, and trying to level it up was a pain in the ass, so I just ended up not bothering with the whole system for the rest of my playthrough. Another one of the main problems I had with Starfield's combat was that the enemy variety is really low. You'll pretty much be fighting the same 2 human enemy types the entire game with maybe a different skin. Now you might fight some aliens or robots here and there, but for the majority of the time you'll be fighting the same faceless pirates throughout the entire game whose AI is extremely dumb. And not only that, but this game is sorely lacking in boss fights. I think throughout my entire 40-hour playthrough, I've only encountered 2 bosses in this game. One from the UC questline and the final boss, which I didn't even fight because I persuaded him to surrender. So in reality, I just fought 1 boss in this entire game, which is massively disappointing considering how Fallout and Elder Scrolls games had numerous memorable boss fights that left a lasting impression on me years after I beat the games. Meanwhile, Starfield has the Hunter, who's a generic, poorly written, cartoonishly evil bad guy, and an alien thing that can mind control other living beings. That's it. The boss variety in this game is non-existent. And no, the captains you encounter at the end of the dungeons do not count as bosses because they're just normal enemies with more health. The lack of bosses in Starfield is really disappointing and just makes this game feel even more dull. To add on top of that, the RPG mechanics are really lackluster. Starfield is a bare bones RPG that does the absolute minimum to be even considered one. Now let's talk about one of the reasons why that is, the perk system. I think that some of the perks are okay for the most part. The problem with them is that a lot of them are useless and you would never really want to take them unless you were doing some sort of meme build, like the unarmed perk or the increased chance to recover from infections perk. These are just filler perks that no one would ever take in a normal playthrough. And also, one thing that really irked me about the perk system is how they lock the levels behind these stupid challenges that you have to do in order to just put a point into something. For example, if I have 2 skill points that I want to spend into ballistics, I can't just put 2 skill points into it and go about my playthrough like normal. I have to put 1 point into it, then I have to complete some arbitrary prerequisite like kill 50 guys or something before I can put my second skill point into it. This is such a bafflingly stupid roadblock that slows the player's progression to a screeching halt. If Bethesda just made this system into a standard RPG skill tree where you can put the points into the stat and get the thing, that would have been much better. And not only that, but the loot system is also poorly implemented into this game because none of it ever feels meaningful. Starfield has the same generic white to yellow rarity system that every RPG needs to have nowadays, except that getting loot doesn't ever feel exciting because the rarities don't add much value to the items at all. A legendary weapon will still feel exactly the same as a gray weapon. The only difference is that the legendary will do slightly more damage to robots or something. There was nothing that the legendary pieces of loot did that made me want to chase them. Sure, some of them might look kinda cool, but every piece of loot might as well be gray because the difference between them is incredibly small. This is just the laziest form of execution for this kind of system, and feels like it was tacked onto this game only because their past games had RPG elements too. Now, the final nail in the coffin for Starfield, at least for me, was that the story and writing were either horribly bad or extremely boring. There's gonna be some spoilers up ahead, so be warned. Starfield's story starts with you in an underground mining tunnel mining for resources until all of a sudden you stumble across a mysterious alien artifact with weird powers. You touch the artifact and you get these weird visions of the universe, then you pass out. Once you wake up, you meet Barrett, then shortly after you get attacked by random pirates. And after you defeat the pirates, Barrett gives you his ship in order to travel to New Atlantis in order to meet the members of the Constellation and figure out the mysteries of the ancient artifact. This is where you'll be introduced to the main companions of the game, who are all extremely uninteresting and generic. Like I mentioned before, they're all some sort of variation of the goody two-shoes archetype. All of them are just the unequivocal good guys who just want to do the right thing, which there's nothing wrong with that if their individual stories were any good. And spoiler alert, they aren't. Most of them are these lame quest lines that don't really have any good resolutions at the end of them. Like the Barrett questline where you go running around multiple planets searching for evidence for this dumb trial, only for it to end with Barrett just telling you unceremoniously that the trial already happened. You don't ever get to participate or attend the trial yourself, you're just kinda told that it happened, which is the laziest route Bethesda could have taken. And this is how they chose to conclude one of the main companions' quest lines. I could overlook this if this was only the case with the side quests, but the main story also isn't that great either. All that pretty much happens is that you and the Constellation go look for the rest of the ancient artifacts until you eventually encounter the Hunter, who's part of this race called the Starborn, who are just humans that have found all the artifacts in another universe and have transcended into a multiversal being. On paper this sounds interesting, but the execution was way off because the Hunter is just a generic mustache twirling villain whose only motivation is that he wants power. Then we meet another Starborn named the Emissary, who's just the generic good guy who wants to protect the universe. Then at the end you just choose between the good side or the bad side, which has no effect on the ending whatsoever. And then you just get thrust into New Game Plus, where the main gimmick is that you get some slightly new dialogue in some of the cutscenes. But other than that, it's pretty much exactly what you would expect from a New Game Plus. I know that Bethesda Game Studios was never really known for writing deep or thought-provoking stories, but this has got to be one of the worst written stories out of all their games they have ever made. It's generic, it's boring, and it's forgettable, and I worry for the Elder Scrolls 6 if it's going to be written anything like this. With that being said, being a longtime Bethesda enjoyer who's been playing their games since Skyrim, I'm overall pretty disappointed with Starfield. They advertised that this game was supposed to be Bethesda's magnum opus, that we were able to explore hundreds of unique planets and get lost within them for hundreds of hours. This was supposed to be the culmination of 8 long years of development, but the end result is a game that's as wide as an ocean but only as deep as a puddle. That's not to say there aren't any good aspects to this game. I think the music and atmosphere of the game can be really good when you're exploring new planets. And although I didn't do much of it, the shipbuilding and ship combat are actually decently interesting and were probably the times where I had the most fun with the combat. And while I did say that most of the quests were boring, there were some that were actually pretty good. Like the UC questline where you have to go to the origin of the terramorphs and destroy the source of them, and it ends with this decently cool boss fight. Or the one where you have to jump between two parallel universes in order to get to an artifact, and at the end of it you can decide which universe you want to save. I'll admit that it was pretty cool, but unfortunately those moments are so scarce and far between each other that the boring moments far outweigh the fun moments and just sour the experience as a whole. I don't think Starfield is really a bad game, but it for sure is not a good one either. It definitely feels like Bethesda have started to run out of ideas, and it really shows in their outdated game design philosophy of Starfield, where they prioritize quantity over quality. And unfortunately, I don't think this will change anytime soon, because a lot of people will still praise this game to high heaven and give Bethesda a pass on what's objectively bad game design because of the mindset that modders will fix the game. I just hope that enough people will light a fire under Bethesda's ass to hopefully spark a change in their game design so that Elder Scrolls 6 doesn't fall into the same traps as Starfield did. But who knows, only time will tell. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know down below and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content in the future. See ya.